it's not an all or nothing thing. You don't need the person working on the newsletter to write all of it and then you just never look at it and press send. For us, it was, hey, help us with the groundwork of getting this set up. Help us especially create the skeleton and the template of what we want to create. And then can we just plug in stuff each week and have, I would say, a more collaborative process, which has really been useful for us.
Grant, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm having a good day. So tell me a little bit about BPI. I know you're one of the co-founders, co-creators. How'd it come about and what do you do there?
Sure. Bitcoin Policy Institute, we're a think tank that researches Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency policy issues. We're a 501c3 public charity. So we're a nonpartisan organization. We're not left-leaning, right-leaning, anything like that. We work with policymakers across the political spectrum, primarily on national issues, federal issues in Washington, D.C. And at our core, we're doing policy analysis, we're supporting independent academic research, and we're trying to bring a more data-focused, objective approach to looking at the Bitcoin space and recognizing, hey, at the point where this technology not only exists, right, but it's Bitcoin is worth over $1 trillion cumulatively in terms of market cap. This is here. It's ingrained in our financial infrastructure. It is only continuing to grow. So at that point, how do we seek to maximize the benefits for the United States and minimize the risks? So that is kind of the overview of what we do at BPI. And as you can imagine, a lot of our work is dependent on kind of the day-to-day, week-to-week goings on in Washington, D.C. And so, there are constantly either bills being proposed or moved or edited or being commented on. There are a number of things that can happen both in the U.S. or around the world that will impact what a specific congressperson, thinks about, this technology or how it interacts with the other bills and legislation that they're working on. And all this is to say is there's kind of a general upkeep of things that we have to understand going on in Washington, D.C. And then finally, I don't know if I'm doing the best job of answering your question or maybe in the order that you asked them, but how did this come about? Again, there just wasn't a lot of really serious conversation happening around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency policy when we started this organization. There was a lot of hype. If you believed it, you thought, Bitcoin's going to the moon. It's going to be $1 million. And, if you disagree, then, I can't talk to you. Or if you didn't think that Bitcoin was good, you thought it was fully a scam and, you just kind of completely disregarded it, thought only criminals were using it. And the reality is like most things in life is the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. And that somewhere in the middle is where the policy making actually happens. But you can't get to that policy making until you all agree on what are the facts, what do we think this is going, what is this doing now, and what do we think is going to happen in the future? And so our organization is trying to figure out those questions.
In terms of understanding how the organization works, right? A lot of our customers are more traditional businesses, right? It's like they sell a service and their customers pay them for that service. And, our newsletters and our content marketing exist to promote that service. To my understanding, the way at least your nonprofit works, it's all donor supported. It's that's kind of if there were to be a customer or a stakeholder, is that kind of a correct way of describing it?
For sure. One of our stakeholders, I would say, is our donors, right? So the vast majority of our donors are just small dollar donors who believe in our work. They've given $10, $20, $50, and they're interested in understanding how Bitcoin policy is developing in Washington, D.C. And just essentially what those latest developments are. I would say in terms of the primary stakeholders of our actual work, right? Our nonprofit mission, our exempt purpose is to educate policymakers and the general public on Bitcoin. And so the majority of people who interact with our work, I would say, would be policymakers, right? Either members of the federal government in Washington, D.C., or people in the broader policy apparatus, right? So lobbyists, non-governmental organizations, other nonprofits, think tanks, that type of thing. And then a lot of like staffers, legislative assistants, legislative directors at various congressional offices, and then various executive agencies.
It's very cool. I actually did go to one of their events for people listening, and it was cool to see the company in action, and not the company, the nonprofit in action doing exactly what Grant just described, right? Like a room full of policymakers and also more casual enthusiasts and interested people who just want to learn and have thoughtful, structured discussion around all of these topics. My next question for you is, what came about? Why did you bring Orbit Marketing in to assist with kind of your content marketing and the newsletter creation for BPI?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we have to keep up with a lot of stuff. We have to track a lot of stuff, whether that's legislatively, but then also in the sense of kind of global news. And so many different things can impact what is happening with Bitcoin policy. And so a great example is, I guess, less than 2 years ago at this point, the end of 2022, when FTX collapses, and it's this multi-billion-dollar exchange that has obviously a ton of customer funds tied up, but also their leadership had been building relationships with members of Congress and other people in Washington. So this exchange collapses, there's allegations of fraud, and all sorts of news is coming out, both in real time, but then retrospective pieces as weeks go by and we learn more about the situation. Policymakers, their job is often dependent on what the issue du jour is, right? What the most powerful topics are at that moment, and the ones that are resulting in the most pressure from their constituents. And so when something like that happens, that massive, policymakers are scrambling, trying to figure out, okay, what the heck happened? Why did it happen? Who's at fault? And then what do we do, right? And so all this is to say is, like, there's constantly new information coming out. And when you think about the stakeholders that I listed before, they're just trying to figure out, like, how do we get the most information as quickly as possible? How do we make sure that this information is good, that it's accurate, that's valuable? And this was, the FTX situation was before we were working with you all. And this is the type of thing where, okay, we're just having to send manual emails, right? Updating our stakeholders on what's going on and how it's influencing policy, just based on like us curating information and then getting it to the right people. And that's a huge part of our job. But what we realized at BPI is, like, some of that can and should be more automated and more streamlined, and ultimately just put us in a position where we're getting the information to the people who need it when they need it, but so that it's also not like a significant burden, on our organization. Because while we're keeping track of all this stuff, we have a lot of different things going on, and we're a small team. And I would say content marketing is not always at like the forefront of our day-to-day conversations or the activities that we're doing. So being in a position where, hey, we know this content and this information needs to get to our stakeholders, we're already keeping track of it, but maybe we're not doing the best job of curating the right articles, or on a weekly basis getting something to people routinely. So how can we merge those two things? And that's ultimately why we started working together, and we found that, hey, there's some really awesome synergy here. Y'all can put together a template. You can help us curate the articles that we're reading, and then we can go in and make sure that it's in BPI's voice, that everything on there is, stuff that, again, that we think is really important for our stakeholders to learn and understand. We can editorialize a little bit and, do the actual policy analysis. But just that groundwork of like curating the important topics of each week takes a lot of time, and having that done for us, I think it's been a huge value add.
It's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't consider the spectrum that exists in terms of both when working with an agency or really hiring kind of any writer or marketing assisted related position. Is this person's either completely helpful or completely useless? Yep. And there definitely is like a middle ground where, for something like what you all do, where there's an added layer of depth and nuance to the expertise, where although we've kind of trained up a lot of people on our team to become more familiar with Bitcoin and Bitcoin policy than they're expecting when they first started working for us. Ultimately, in kind of engagements like this, it's helpful to be able to provide that research and probably clear out 95% of the time involved and take something that might have taken someone from your team half a day, maybe a whole day, depending on if they've built a process and kind of know the right places to look, know how to do it efficiently. Whereas you just know that on a certain day of the week, I think for us it's Tuesdays, there's going to be that draft that has enough information for a super thorough update. And then just someone from your teams takes the 20, 30 minutes to fact check and make sure it's aligned with kind of the beliefs and missions of your organization and interprets it for, again, the stakeholders that you have a deeper relationship with than we do.
Definitely. And that's the key is we realized early on, okay, we can't completely outsource the 100% of the content creation of our organization, right? That is the whole point of our organization, is that we have experts on our team who are able to distill complex topics and provide our organization's perspectives on those topics. And so if we were outsourcing the perspectives on those topics 100%, why does our organization exist, right? Why aren't you all just BPI, right, at that point? That was the takeaway that we had. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been a ton of value, to your point, in having somebody working on the content before it gets to us. Because, again, I have realized so much of the time that comes with content creation of this form, it really comes from the curation component and finding the right things to talk about, finding the right sources, and compiling the summary or high levels of a story before you can even get into the analysis. And so, I guess echoing your point, it's not an all or nothing thing. You don't need the person working on the newsletter to write all of it and then you just never look at it and press send. For us, it was, hey, help us with the groundwork of getting this set up. Help us especially create the skeleton and the template of what we want to create. And then can we just plug in stuff each week and have, I would say, a more collaborative process, which has really been useful for us.
And I think what's interesting there, a lot of the work that you all do is very deep and nuanced and complex. And you're not necessarily going to every single week have one of those ready to go, right? There's not just I remember however long back you did a really thorough analysis of kind of Bitcoin and energy and the intersection of those topics. You can't just produce something to that caliber every single week, but then you kind of, on the flip side, lose that consistency from a marketing point of view with your stakeholders to have that consistent interval. So what's nice is that when you have the weekly newsletter on the regular interval, regular but not fully predictable interval, when you do all publish an additional kind of large tranche of research, you already have a slot and a calendar and a rhythm where people are used to receiving updates from you.
100%. So just to talk a little bit about the specifics of our newsletter a little bit more, every week we're providing summaries and analysis of important policy-related, Bitcoin policy-related news events, and we're sending those out to our stakeholders, right? But to your point, at BPI, we'll publish these longer white papers or policy reports that sometimes we do want, to get out to the largest audience possible. Sometimes it's more targeted and we just, email those to certain people, or it just goes on our website, that type of thing. Sometimes we put a lot of time into a report, one on Bitcoin and energy, to your point. And this thing's 20, 30 pages long. The great thing about the newsletter is, like you said, there's already a slot for that. And so we're updating you on the main events for the week. And then maybe one of the key highlights for this week is check out the BPI report that we just published on XYZ. And here's a little blurb on what it explores. So it's customizable in that way. It allows us to plug things in when and where we think it's important or necessary. But then to your point, I think one of the primary values for us has been, it just continues to give us these check-ins, these touch points with our stakeholders. And being able to do that consistently has been, I would say, extremely valuable, because as a nonprofit, you don't always have your A+ multi-month material to share with someone every week, like you said. But letting them know, hey, we're still here, we're doing the work, here's what we've been up to. It just ensures that you're still, maybe not top of mind, but you're still on their mind. And that's useful for donors. That's useful for the people we work with in Washington, D.C. It's useful for any of our stakeholders, just so they know, hey, this organization's still here, they're still churning, and they're still working hard. And as long as they know that, then it puts us in a position where when they do need us, or when we do need them, we're both kind of primed. That relationship hasn't gone stagnant.
I think that's such an important part of it as well. Kind of, again, on the spectrum, we do work with people who, they're really just selling a simple product, and it's someone finds out about the product and you just want to hit that person with marketing messaging, just, aggressively within reason, such that the person either makes a purchase or gets off the list. But something like you're doing, right? Like the long, slow moving beast of the government, everyone understands it's a slow game, and it is about the longevity and just about knowing kind of who still exists in the long run. So
for sure, really quickly, I mean, just to put some context there are bills that are being voted on now in Congress, specifically in our area of expertise, that were introduced all the way back in 2022, right? So you think about the pipeline there and the timeline. You need to continue these relationships for multiple years if you want to be involved in the conversations from beginning to end. And so you need to do that, but you also don't want to be bothering this person every week asking for 30 minutes to meet with them, right? There's not always going to be something to talk about. There's not always going to be a reason to do that. And so something like this just gives, I would say, a low lift, low intensity. What's the best word I'm looking for?
Just low commitment, like lightweight, low ask.
Yeah. Low ask. Exactly. Right. Low commitment, low ask. It is not super aggressive. They can open it, spend 5 seconds, 30 seconds on it, or they can spend 5 minutes and send me an email and say, hey, we should meet, or anything in between. And so that flexibility that it gives the stakeholder, I think is a really important point to highlight of like why this is valuable for us.
Very cool. Have you noticed, or anything to the extent you're able to share, any specific, maybe measurable, beneficial outcomes if there have been, people who you lost contact with, you don't have to name names, that out of nowhere kind of did pop their heads up because the newsletter kind of recreated a relationship, if there was a product or financial gain from being able to benefit things?
I don't know exactly how measurable it's going to be. I will say our open rates have remained pretty consistent and pretty solid. So I've been very happy with that, right? There hasn't been like a ton of drop off or a bunch of people unsubscribing. And as our newsletter has slowly grown, we've seen people continuing to engage with it. So that's kind of, one metric that I've been super happy with. And then two, I would just say, there's not necessarily one specific example that I can think of, or that I'll share here, but I would say broadly, we have gotten multiple people, where, maybe we haven't spoken to them for 3, 6, 9 months or whatever. Maybe they're a donor, maybe they're just someone we interacted with and they were a fan of our work and we were a fan of theirs, but it's just been a while since we talked, and they'll see one of our newsletters, and we've gotten a number of responses that say something to the effect of, great work, guys, keep it up, right? Or great hearing from you, or can you tell me more about this? We should meet. It's been a while. And so, I mean, even if you just have a small handful of those, again, our organization is so relationship based. And I think most business is relationships. And so if this is something that allows relationships to be cultivated over a longer period, it allows them not to stagnate. It allows them to be almost reignited, right? Just offering that tiny bit of a spark or ember, that could be reignited when you need it, then I think the value is certainly there, especially in light of what I think has been just a very affordable rate for us as a nonprofit.
Amazing. I want to give you an opportunity here. I know you've spoken a lot about the business, but who specifically, I say the business and it's a habit, the organization, who specifically, should be, I mean, listening to this and is just like, I like Bitcoin, want to get more involved, want to learn more about it. This sounds very interesting. Obviously, I'm going to have my plugs later for people to learn about what we do at Orbit Marketing, but who should be checking out BPI?
Oh, great question. Yeah, if you're interested at all in just Bitcoin policy in general, you don't have to be someone working in Washington, D.C. to gain value from our work and to, I guess, find it interesting or keep up with what's going on in terms of policy decisions in Washington, D.C. Our work deals with the intersection, or it deals with Bitcoin at the intersection of key policy areas that decision makers in Washington, D.C. are already focused on. So we look at Bitcoin in the context of its energy usage and environmental impact, in the context of national security and geoeconomics, in the context of financial inclusion and global human rights. And so if you're just interested in learning more about how our political system works and how emerging technology is integrated in existing policy conversations, you might find our organization interesting. Outside of that, obviously, if you're in the policy space, check out our work. But even then, all our stuff is free. It's all, open source. That's a huge, part of our organization. Like I said from the start, we're a public charity. So our work is there. If it's useful for you, awesome. If it's not, send a nasty email telling me how much you hate it and go on with your day.
Well, it's a good note to end on. Grant, thanks for sharing your experience working with us.
Yeah, appreciate you, Lewis. Talk later.